This is an LA Times Studios podcast.
It was described at the time as a freak storm, an unusual weather event, a winter deluge. And it's true. The winter of 1982 to 83 was one for the history books. Across Southern California, rivers overflowed. Roads disappeared underwater. Hillsides gave way. A tornado ripped through South LA, tearing away part of the roof of the Los Angeles Convention Center. Irene Willis described to the Los Angeles Times how it lifted her Lincoln Versailles up into the air, with her inside it. Malibu resident Kurt Holst watched the ocean smash a piano through the wall of his family's house. An LA Times reporter interviewed Holst. He told them, quote, "We didn't think anything scientific. We just thought high tide, big waves, old house." That line captures something important about Los Angeles in the early 80s. People knew the weather was strange. They just didn't know why. At a Scripps workshop in La Jolla in March 1983, researchers debated the cause. Two Scripps scientists had even proposed that volcanic eruptions in Mexico might be responsible. Eventually, the strange weather got a name: El Niño, an old term used by fishermen in Peru and Ecuador. Today, it's hard to imagine a time before El Niño, because now it's not just a scientific term. It's part of our cultural vocabulary.
It's almost like a character in California where we're all thinking, this boogeyman is coming, and we have this foresight, and then we get to see what happens.
By the 1990s, El Niño reporting had become something very different. Scientists had gotten dramatically better at seeing the warming Pacific coming. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration had better satellites, better ocean observations, and more importantly, better methods for communicating warnings to the public. In the build-up to the next large El Niño in 1997, it wasn't being billed as some mysterious thing happening to California. It was welcomed as if it were a full-blown celebrity. You might remember Chris Farley's legendary El Niño skit on Saturday Night Live. While wearing a sequined bolero with no shirt underneath and a wrestling belt that read El Niño, Farley pretended to be, the weather event itself, challenging all other tropical storms to a battle. Late-night comedians aside, the federal government was talking about it too.
Certainly, the latest El Niño is partly to blame for the severe weather conditions that have besieged so many communities. But growing evidence suggests that the extreme and erratic weather we're seeing in America and around the world is being intensified by global warming.
The American public went from flying blind to having a warning system. But now, as a warming climate sets the stage for what could be one of the biggest El Niños on record, the federal government's ability to communicate those risks is coming under strain. In 1982, people didn't know what El Niño was. In the 1990s, we learned how to see it coming. Today, we're facing a new challenge. What happens when the weather gets more dangerous, but the politics around climate change are offering us fewer tools to prepare? From LA Times Studios, this is Boiling Point. I'm Miranda Green.
During one of the most severe windstorms Southern California experienced in more than a decade, the Palisades and Eaton fires ignited, leaving heartbreaking losses in our communities. Now, as we build back, we're building stronger, cleaner, and more resilient in communities most vulnerable to dangerous weather conditions and wildfires. Southern California Edison is placing power lines underground, hardening the electric system by installing wires with protective coating, and adding advanced technology to help keep communities safe. The work is underway as communities rebuild across the region. And if you were impacted by the Eaton fire, support may be available through Southern California Edison's Wildfire Recovery Compensation Program. Claims can be filed directly through the program. No legal fees, no lengthy litigation, payment in months, not years. To file or explore the program, visit sce.com/directclaims. Communications funded by ratepayers.
Everyone is selling you a better way to live. A morning routine, a blood test, a serum, a supplement, a reason your face looks tired. Some of it's real, some of it's marketing with better lighting. This season on Live and Well, I'm talking to the people who actually know the difference. Doctors, founders, experts, and culture shapers with something sharper to say about skin, health, aging, beauty, fitness, food, and the way we're all trying to feel a little better in our bodies. I'm Melissa Magsaysay. Listen to Live and Well from LA Times Studios wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to the inaugural episode of What Matters Now with DLA Piper. Today we're discussing private equity's role in sports.
I think increasingly over the last 10 to 15 years, institutional capital and other, capital sources have kind of looked at this and recognized this is a pretty attractive investment property.
For the longest time, sports was viewed as a passion and not a business, but they are a great business.
AI is doing some disfragmentation. We're seeing the same thing in the media world, except for in sports.
This is What Matters Now with DLA Piper. In this episode, DLA's Richard Rubano and Ranesh Ramanathan are joined by Vishal Gandhi, Managing Director at Ares Credit Group, to break down the opportunities and constraints and explore what private equity's growing presence means for the future of sports as both a business and a cultural institution.
When's the first IPO?
To hear a portion of their conversation, stay tuned at the end of this episode.
Ron Lin is a reporter for the Los Angeles Times who's been covering El Niño and what it could mean for Southern California. We spoke about what scientists mean when they say we should expect a super El Niño this year and what we can learn from past disasters so that all communities can prepare. Hi, Ron. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast today.
Sure thing.
So, Ron, let's start from the very beginning. What is El Niño?
So El Niño is this climate pattern that happens every 2 to 7 years, and it lasts 9 to 12 months. And it's marked by this combination of warmer waters in the central and eastern tropical Pacific Ocean, and it's tied to changing conditions in the atmosphere. And why we care about it so much in California is that when we get strong El Niños, they typically correlate with higher than average precipitation in Southern California.
It seems like El Niño is almost everywhere right now. The LA Times has numerous articles. It's all over Google. Why is it something that is so important? Why is it something that's getting so much attention right now?
So one of the reasons why we think El Niño is so interesting is that it can provide a hint to what the weather's going to be like months out from now. And so, especially in California, El Niño has this, it's like a character almost in this state where people think of El Niño and they think this is like a real big indicator that something bad, like a severe winter season is about to come.
I remember, in the 90s, I think we had an El Niño in 1997 and 1998. And I remember my local paper in my hometown of Santa Barbara, it had front page photos of people getting around on kayaks because that's how much rain we were getting. And you're right, El Niño has this kind of local fascination. It's almost like a local lore. Are you seeing some of that again this time around?
Oh, certainly. I mean, and I think it has to do with the fact that if you know that this winter is going to be a bad one, people start thinking about, gosh, should I get my roof replaced? What kinds of things can I do? And California is a place of extremes, right? We get extreme everything. We get extreme fires. We get extreme floods. And also, this particular El Niño, it could be one of the strongest on record. It could even be the strongest on record. And because we're in the situation with extreme climate, even just with normal king tides in the wintertime, even without El Niño, we're seeing, places all along the coast, get flooded. And we also know that El Niño can contribute to higher than normal tides. And so there's been this we're all revving up for this expectation of possibly a winter that we've never seen before.
I want to go back to something you said earlier, which I thought was really interesting. You know, when we think about weather is usually an indicator of a bigger global issue like climate change. But you're right, we only really get forecasts about 10 days out, and they're not always the most accurate. But this is really unique because we are essentially, we were, a month ago getting warned that there were signs that there was an El Nino. And then finally, scientists have said, no, there's enough data to prove that one is coming. And now we're starting to get an idea of how strong that El Nino will be. That sets up a lot of uncertainty and, certainty and uncertainty. It's like you have this looming storm literally that you know is coming, and now we have to know how to prepare for that. And I imagine that is putting officials and locals in a very interesting place. How are local communities preparing for this?
Yeah. I mean, one thing that communities across the state should be dealing with or preparing for is what if we're going to get very strong storms, right? I mean, people may not realize that that California is a land of extremes in the fact that in the 1860s, there was this incredible amount of rain that just smashed the state over and over to the point where large portions of the Central Valley and the LA Basin were just covered in water. So this stuff can happen. And so one of the things that officials should be doing is doing things like, making sure that catch basins that collect water that's rushing down from the mountains, that they're clear so that water, when it comes down, it can be channeled out to sea, very quickly. There's a lot of things that, other people can do, even just homeowners, just, making sure they clear out their gutters and get prepared for a big rainy season to come.
I think one of the things that I have had a hard time understanding with El Nino is it going to be a blessing for California having all this water in terms of maybe it meaning we're going to have less of a concerning fire season, or is it going to be a curse because it's going to mean flooding and sea level rise and potentially mudslides? How should we be viewing this storm system that's about to hit us?
That's a great question. I mean, that's always the risk, right? So Southern California, especially, it's a dramatic scene every fall and winter. Are we going to get rain before the Santa Anas come and create these, hot, dry winds that could cause a firestorm if an ignition happens? If we get enough rain early enough in like October or November to douse everything, that part of El Nino could very well be a blessing. But but the worst case scenario could also happen, whereas the rain may not develop until December. And if we get, hot, dry Santa Ana winds in October and November, and a fire comes in, I mean, this is what happened just about 2 years ago, then that could be the worst case scenario in which we would have a firestorm. And then if heavy rains come in, then we get, a season of mudslides and flooding. That's just the big question. And we won't know what will happen until it happens.
I know that scenario all too well. The 2018 mud flow in Montecito, California, which is where I'm from. I mean, we had the historic Thomas Fire, which blew through, had one of the longest fire seasons that the state had ever seen. This ended right in January. And then a week later, we got dumped with rain, and it just turned into these devastating, deadly mudslides. I imagine that this is the type of thing that are on a lot of locals' minds going into this season. El Nino looms large in California, but considering that this might be one of the biggest ones or the strongest ones that we've seen in modern history, I think that probably is making a lot of people concerned. Have you talked to any locals about their thoughts on this? How are people kind of approaching this in their minds?
So one thing that we know is that we should learn from the lessons, like from Montecito, right? I mean, one of the things that our colleagues at the LA Times reported on during the Montecito fires was there were a couple of reasons why the death toll was so deadly in 2018. One was there are these catch basins, in the Santa Barbara area that are supposed to catch debris, and it was known for quite a while that wasn't being managed well. And so I think one of the things that I think local emergency managers across the state have hopefully learned is that it's super important that efforts be done to make sure that engineering systems designed to hold mud and water and flush that out so it doesn't overwhelm cities, that gets resolved. The second thing I think is one of the problems that Californians face is this idea of disaster fatigue, right? Not only did we see it not only did we see it in Montecito, where there had been, numerous evacuation orders, prior to the devastating one. And there was a kind of a sense of fatigue, like, oh, do we really need to evacuate? And I think that was a factor in why a number of people, didn't evacuate. When you know the weather conditions are going to be in place that are going to put us all at risk for either a major wildfire or any kind of natural disaster, there are things you can do to get infrastructure and first responders in place so that you can act quickly when disaster does strike.
So I know that we've been talking mostly about the impacts of El Niño in California, but this is something that's going to happen across the globe, and it's going to impact different continents in different ways. What has your reporting shown you in terms of what to expect? How will different regions be impacted?
So in a typical El Niño, Southern California typically gets more than average rain, but that means that places like the Pacific Northwest, those typically get drier than normal conditions. And then worldwide, very dry conditions are expected in places like Australia and northern South America, but wetter conditions may prevail over places like Eastern Africa.
So it's not going to be uniform what's going to happen with El Niño. It's going to impact different regions very, very differently and
Right.
likely in very dramatic ways.
Right. And the crazy thing is that sometimes El Niño does not act the way we want it to. Like, there was the famous Godzilla El Niño of 2015, 2016, and it was very strong in the Pacific Ocean, and it had very dramatic impacts across the world, but it was a miss in Southern California. We actually got less rain than the average. So El Niño can be a helpful indicator, but it can miss expectations depending on what area you're looking at.
I know one of the headlines that I keep seeing is that El Niño could really impact the world's food supply and make certain items more scarce, and therefore prices will go up. What could that look like for people at the supermarket?
So it depends. There are actually some situations where El Niño can actually help. So across the California coast, the El Niño in the past has been associated with larger sablefish found closer to shore and a higher larval abundance of rockfish. So that can actually be helpful for fishermen across California. However, in terms of like other aspects of what we can expect in Southern California, we actually might see more shark sightings because of this increase in tropical or warm temperatures. Even whale sharks have visited off of Catalina, including in that last super El Niño in 2015, 2016. And we even might see more sea jellies and other gelatinous creatures across the Southern California coast. And then in terms of other aspects, though, if there are droughts in areas where people rely on the rain for irrigation, that's going to be a big impact.
So it sounds like warming waters mean that animals are maybe drawn to the Pacific in a way that they haven't before, because it's this, typically colder ocean is now getting warmer. And so we will see kind of an influx of certain animals come closer, like sharks. But at the same time, I have also been told that it could deplete and kind of hurt populations because it gets too hot, right? And we already are seeing some die-offs of different animals on the shore because they're no longer able to get the kind of small microplankton and foods that they need. They have to go into deeper waters and colder waters to get that. Is that a concern?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, so we know that El Niño is going to prolong this marine heat wave that we've been dealing with, and we know that past marine heat waves have decimated California's kelp. In fact, bull kelp habitats have declined 90% in Northern California since 2014. Wow. And this has led to a wave of many problems, right? We have endangered white abalone. Warmer waters can exacerbate the effects of sea star wasting disease, including the sunflower sea star. This is a population that's been nearly wiped out of California. And in past strong El Niños, there have been things like decreased plankton. And this is obviously a very important food source for marine animals. And then there's an increased probability of harmful algal blooms. And so in terms of other fisheries that could be impacted, previous strong El Niños have caused a lower abundance and a more northward shift of market squid. We've seen reduced productivity of California sea lions, and the pups are often smaller.
Wow.
And in the past, their very strong El Niños have resulted in several closures of crab and shellfish fisheries, due to these harmful algal blooms.
How much can actually be done to get ready for this? Are there solutions that could be done right now in the next couple of months, or is that an unrealistic thing to expect?
Oh, definitely. There are things that can be done right now. So it's not just the counties and the cities that are on the hook for this. Think about, your own areas. Like, are you the kind of resident who, if you see, a blocked up storm drain, down the street in between storms, are you going to be the neighbor who says, maybe I should help clear that out? I mean, that can make a big difference in keeping your street, safer from flooding than not. And there are other things that I think emergency managers and mayors, can learn from all of these disasters that have happened. I mean, something that comes to mind all the time is, the mayor of Los Angeles, she was not here, in the city as the worst firestorm in modern LA County history, hit, even though the National Weather Service was warning about, particularly dangerous situations. And I remember there was a former mayor in San Francisco who also was not in town, even though there were warnings about a severe flooding. And, she was out in Vegas when this flooding happened. And so, and so there are things that I think mayors and emergency managers can learn in terms of, hey, when the National Weather Service, is warning about, extreme weather conditions coming, it's important to listen to them.
It does sound like the timing is pretty nebulous for whoever wins that mayor's race in November. They're going to be up and running right away once they get into that position.
It's a year-round issue. Natural disasters is a year-round issue, and it's something that everyone needs to pay attention to all the time.
Ron, thank you so much for coming on and walking us through this.
Sure thing.
A super El Niño is coming this winter. But how will that look on the ground? After the break, I speak with climatologist Daniel Swain about how innovations have allowed scientists and meteorologists to get ahead of El Niño. And, on the other hand, how the politics surrounding climate change are potentially impacting federal data collection and preparedness.
Do you want the truth about the organic food on your plate? Then check out the Real Organic Podcast. It's the award-winning, best sustainability, environment, and climate podcast, produced by the Real Organic Project and hosted by Dave Chapman and me, Lindley Dixon. Recently named one of the best climate podcasts by Earth.org, the Real Organic Podcast uncovers the forces reshaping organic food, like how corporate lobbying is redefining what organic means, and how industry use of new terms like regenerative are not even organic. Each episode features deep conversations with farmers, scientists, chefs, and journalists fighting to improve the food system. If you need a place to start, check out our recent episode with James Beard Award-winning author Nancy Matsumoto. From grass-fed dairy farmers to reviving regional grains, Nancy reveals the hidden work required to create transparent local food chains in stark contrast to Big Ag. So go ahead, follow the Real Organic Podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
Checked out your thermostat and your electric bill lately? Both are rising faster than we'd like, and students and teachers are feeling the heat too. While they sit in uncomfortable classrooms and breathe dirty air, California is sitting on nearly $200 million in funds set aside to upgrade aging school heating and cooling systems. By freeing hoarded school HVAC funds, students and teachers can get cooler, cleaner air, and by putting the interest on these funds to work, families can access cheaper and cleaner energy when temperatures climb instead of relying on the most expensive, dirty sources of power. Before leaving Sacramento, lawmakers must extend the California Schools Healthy Air Plumbing and Efficiency Program, or CalShape, and finally release funding for cooler, cleaner classrooms. At the same time, legislators must set aside the $70 million in interest earned to reduce electricity costs for families through the Demand-Side Grid Support Program, Learn more at edfaction.org. That's edfaction.org. Once again, edfaction.org. Paid for by Environmental Defense Action Fund.
Daniel Swain is a climate scientist who lives in California and studies the impact of extreme weather events. Daniel, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So, California is about to experience another El Niño, but this time locals are being told to expect a storm unlike anything they've seen before. What makes it a super El Niño? Maybe start with just explaining how they made that determination.
Yeah, so it's a super El Nino is not an official term. It essentially is a colloquial term.
Is that just a term that us reporters are using here to explain this? It's not scientific?
Well, it's become more widely used. Actually, I don't mind it. Some scientists find it grating. I think it's fine because what it really is indicating is something beyond strong. There've only been a handful of so-called super El Nino events. This one will probably exceed in some ways, at least in terms of how warm it will get in the ocean, the previous super El Nino events in living memory. So those would be in 1982, 1983, 1997, 1998. And 2015, 2016. I guess whether that's in living memory, I guess depends a bit on who you are. But for many of us, more than one of those is. And so, this is a big deal. So it probably will be that this winter, the rest of the year, both in terms of California climate, in terms of our conversation, but probably also global climate too, there's really only going to be two major factors at play. One is climate change, because that's always there, acting in the background. And then the other one is going to be this very strong or super El Nino event. Other things will be happening, but what we're going to notice is those two very loud voices in the room.
So essentially what you're saying is El Nino could be a factor in what we were seeing play out with weather patterns, but just normal weather patterns would be a factor as well. Climate change, as you mentioned, would be a factor. So in more moderate scenarios, El Nino wouldn't necessarily be the main thing that you would say was driving the weather that we are seeing.
Exactly. It's still there. It's still influencing things in the background, but that influence is small enough in those cases that it can be kind of overwhelmed by other natural factors or climate change. And in this case, though, this year it's different because this is an extraordinarily strong event, possibly even the strongest we've ever seen. So it's the biggest possible kick.
How is this the strongest we've ever seen? You mentioned it is a result of warming waters in the Pacific. Is that linked to climate change, or what other factors are driving that?
So, the interesting thing is that there are, El Nino and La Nina, its counterparts, so essentially El Nino and La Nina. They're not quite inverses of each other. But they are relatively opposite phases. El Nino is the warm phase in the East Pacific, and La Nina is the cool phase. They are natural cycles. They've existed probably for the millions of years we've had oceans and continents in their current configuration. So in that sense, it is one of the relatively few true natural cycles that is actually cyclical in some way. But there's a pretty big but here, because there's two ways in which El Nino does actually interact with climate change and is potentially influenced by it. The most obvious one is that, the analogy, a rising tide raises all boats. Yep. The oceans are warming everywhere all the time because of global warming. And El Nino is special because it results in a highly concentrated, localized warming that is temporary. Part of the reason why this El Nino event will be as warm as it is because of the long-term warming trend, and that has amplified the magnitude. But here's where things get interesting. NOAA is now using an index for the strength of El Nino that accounts for that global warming trend. So that subtracts it out. So we can kind of have an apples-to-apples comparison with other El Nino events occurring in a cooler climate. So we're not just saying, well, yes, everything's getting warmer, so this big event is warmer than the rest because, it's a long-term warming trend. Even if you account for that and get rid of the long-term warming trend for the purpose of comparison, this event still looks like it will be much larger than anything we've seen historically in all likelihood. So by that metric, this event could be one of the strongest kicks to the Pacific climate system that we've seen this winter in terms of aggressively shifting that storm track toward California this winter. So that's one reason why the odds of a very wet winter are significantly higher than they would usually be. But the problem is the real world, we don't just have El Nino, we also have the long-term warming trend. And the reason why that's so important is the world is now warmed by pretty close to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And, that's a significant amount of global warming. The land on Earth is warming about 50% faster than the global average. So we're now, in many cases, above 2 degrees over land. You multiply by 1.8, you get your numbers in Fahrenheit. So it's almost like multiplying by 2. So each of these makes it feel a little bit bigger. But the reason why that matters so much is that from a hydroclimate perspective, we talk about precipitation and evaporation. The warmer it is, the more profound the swings in that hydroclimate cycle become. So the ceiling on how intense both precipitation can be on the one hand and how high evaporation can be on the other are a direct response to temperature in the atmosphere. If we've seen around 1.5 degrees centigrade of global average warming, we're already kind of at the point where the average downpours and rates of evaporation are a good 10 to 12% more intense than they would have been. And with each additional degree of warming, that grows further still. If climate change has gotten us, to 1.5 degrees, and then this year's El Nino adds, another 0.5 degrees perhaps to that, at least temporarily, that's another pretty significant boost in the overall capacity of the air to produce these heavy downpours and these extreme heat waves and these extreme droughts, and therefore affect wildfire behavior as we're seeing this year. So, it's additive.
So just to distill that down, we are seeing the impacts of climate change, which have gotten us to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, which is a big concern. Warming waters across the globe. We're seeing warming temperatures too. And then we are also seeing a El Nino that is likely to be one of the strongest we've ever seen. So those are going to be acting together to potentially give us, storms. What is that going to look like for Californians this winter?
So I think, there's several things that are going to play out. Right now, the nearshore ocean in Southern California, at least, is much warmer than average. You may have noticed, if you're in Southern California, that it has been very muggy this summer. And, that is often not the case. Sometimes it can be true that Southern California, it's not always a dry heat, but it really hasn't been a dry heat this summer. And what you realize is that it doesn't really take highly extreme temperatures to really feel that humidity. So, when it's 80, 90 degrees, those aren't extraordinarily warm temperatures for Southern California in summer. But when the dew point is a tropical 70 degrees, and that is, by the way, a measure of humidity that is measured in degrees, which is slightly confusing, but that's a good, it's a good meteorological lesson for the day.
On a non-scientific note, I can just tell you my hair has recognized that too. So I have felt that humidity.
And people who don't have air conditioning, because usually the cool, moist sea breeze cools you off at night, are realizing that it's not enough when the nighttime temperature is still 70, 75 degrees and the humidity is almost 100% when it's that warm.
You're feeling it.
It's not fun. I can remember I used to run on the Santa Monica beach path. And I was living in LA during the last big El Nino event in 2015, 2016, and it was awfully, awfully uncomfortable. We actually expect the nearshore ocean to get even warmer in the coming months. So we're going to have some water temperatures close to 80 degrees in some places near the California coast.
That's unheard of for the Pacific.
So it's right up there at the top of what we've ever seen, and it may, in fact, break some records. The Scripps Pier in San Diego has actually broken quite a few daily records already this year. It may slightly increase the risk of some tropical downpours between now and the start of the usual rainy season. So, if you remember Tropical Storm Hillary in Southern California a couple years back that dropped like 2-3 inches of rain in LA in August, that was record-breaking summer rain. It was an extraordinary event. The odds of something like that happening again in the next 2 months are probably higher than usual because the ocean is so warm and there's an increased level of Pacific hurricane activity. So that could potentially sort of short-circuit fire season early, which would be nice if we got an inch of rain, in September or October before the big winds come. Could also spark some fires if it's more dry lightning, so that could go either way. But the really big stuff, I think, is going to wait till the winter. The number one impact that is almost 100% certain to occur are greatly elevated local sea levels. A very strong El Nino event and climate change interact in a way that's going to be a problem, because along the California coast, we've seen about 0.5 foot to a foot already of sea level rise. And that's not going anywhere. That's irreversible on human timescales. We're stuck with that, and it's continuing to go up. So all of the coastal infrastructure that we have, those roads, neighborhoods, pipelines, airports, whatever it is, along not just the oceanic coast, but also the coastally connected bodies of water, like San Francisco Bay, Monterey Bay, any of these estuaries or bays along the California coast are potentially highly vulnerable to inundation by not just that sea level rise, we're already kind of seeing that, but then El Nino will probably increase that water level by another foot for much of the coming months. So it's kind of like having sea level rise doubled temporarily for this winter suddenly. That's going to be a big problem on its own, even just regular high tide days. And we're seeing this already with the water encroaching on the Pacific Coast Highway near Malibu and the closure of the
erosion.
Yeah, the Amtrak line between LA and San Diego because of the erosion of the coastal cliffs. So November, December, there could be some big problems in places that are within about 3 and 6 feet of sea level.
So I will get my rain boots ready for this winter. Daniel, I have a question for you. I mean, you are a climatologist, you deal with data, and I know that there has been a bit of a war on data from the federal government, especially when it comes to weather and climate change. How have some of those lacking resources or some of those agencies like NOAA that have been strained by the federal government wanting to essentially get rid of resources and paying for some of this data collection, how is that impacting the data that you're seeing with El Nino? Has there been any sort of overlap?
Well, certainly there has been. Really, right, what we're seeing right now, it isn't just a matter of budget cuts, but it's a seemingly willful effort to dismantle a lot of the public sector, much of civil service, and again, most of the scientists who work for the federal government are civil servants in some form or another. So this has been devastating. But I think the greatest impacts thus far, there have been impacts to data collection systems and data archives and predictive models, certainly. But I actually think that the bigger impact has been on the public-facing communication side of things. We're seeing multiple points of failure emerge there now. And actually, El Nino is unfortunately a very clear example of this, because one of the most highly trafficked NOAA, or National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration websites, was their ENSO blog, ENSO being the acronym that refers to El Nino and La Nina collectively. It ran for a number of years. It was a pretty amazing public communication tool, and it was unceremoniously shuttered, and people were fired. In this current era of not really apparently wanting to talk about anything related to climate or extreme weather. And that was kind of ironic, especially because, of course, this is arguably the year where there's going to be the most public attention ever in all of human history focused on El Nino. There's the forecast for a record-breaking El Nino, but I'm even more confident in my forecast for a record-breaking amount of public attention on El Nino in 2026 for any number of reasons. So that was a particularly inopportune moment for the federal government to pull the plug on this highly cost-efficient, very, very popular, very rigorous, but also accessible communication tool. And I do have one positive thing to say about that, which is that, I've been working over a number of months with some generous philanthropic funders who've managed to partially resurrect, using private dollars, this ENSO blog. It's now called the ENSO Update, and you can find it on climate.us. And so again, the scale of what's been lost is so vast, and the scale of what could still be lost. A lot of people are talking about this in the past tense, and there has been sort of a plateau recently, but there's great alarm over what could happen. So we're still in this moment where there have been some wins, but the losses really are starting to pile up now in a way that's quite visible.
It really struck me as interesting when you told me that NOAA had basically, in doing their calculations on the strength of El Nino, one of the things they did was remove the climate consideration, which sounds like it's important because you want that baseline, but also sounded a little bit like, I'm not surprised by that, knowing that the Trump administration is uncomfortable with acknowledging the reality of climate change.
There have been innumerably many other instances where exactly this thing has happened, where things that have become politically inexpedient or viewed as ideologically contrary to, for identity politics reasons, essentially have become banned words and terms. But unlike previous administrations where this was sort of superficial, where people kind of got around it just by, for example, instead of using the term climate change in a grant proposal, saying the variability of extreme weather events has increased over time. That was kind of like a Bush 2 era tactic that was used, and it wasn't good, but also there were workarounds. There wasn't a really deep effort to root these things out in the same way. That doesn't fly this time. I mean, this time around, these are not superficial, sort of wink, wink, nudge, nudge kind of recommendations. There's a deep-seated ideological effort right now to root out certain topics and exclude them completely from the purview of the federal government. I do think it's important to understand that whatever we're still getting from the federal government right now is only because of the public servants who are still there doing their best under difficult circumstances to continue to put this information out there as credibly as they possibly can in a very suboptimal environment.
Do you know of, or have you heard of any of them muzzling, impacting any of the data that is important for determining what this El Nino will bring? Anything that dovetails with what we will see with El Nino or that are concerning to you?
I mean, I think the challenge here is it's often hard to know except in retrospect. There are a lot of observation and predictive modeling systems that are coasting along right now because they were well enough designed several years ago that they're kind of self-maintaining up to a certain point. But what we're starting to see is when things break, the people aren't there to fix them quickly enough. We saw this actually where there was a major severe weather outbreak, a tornado outbreak across the Ohio River Valley, and some catastrophic flash flooding in other parts of the country. And the National Weather Service just suddenly lost its ability to send warnings out across the whole country, to my understanding, for an extended period during a very critical moment. That really shouldn't have happened, for example. We aren't seeing as many weather balloon launches, particularly in the western U.S., as we used to, and that is really important information. We're seeing delayed improvements to predictive models, or we're seeing predictive models being shut down without a clear replacement in some cases. We're seeing Earth orbiting satellite programs in some cases being terminated early for no obvious reason. They're still economical, they're still operating correctly, but they're being terminated again because they're looking at carbon or climate related things. What's remarkable is with all of this is that I think that this prediction, this advanced prediction of a truly extraordinary historic event is likely to bear out. So we will have successfully predicted a never before seen event in the future, which if you think about it is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But a lot of that is not because of advances that have occurred this year or last year. It's because we have invested for many decades in this country and other countries in the ability, the human, the infrastructural capital to get to the point where we can achieve that. And it is, it's a testament to the resilience of the system and also increasingly the growing role of other countries as the U.S. abdicates its role in all of this. So will that dramatically affect this year's El Nino forecast? Probably not, although you may notice that there's a really limited amount of communication coming from the federal government, on this. You're hearing mostly from people who are not part of the federal government. And I think that is telling in a moment like this one too.
I'd like to take it back to California. What do you think needs to be done to prepare adequately?
I mean, I think that the state, it sounds like taking it seriously. I participated in a town hall event with State Senator Mike McGuire a few weeks ago that was very well attended. It was well organized, and there were some great questions. So I think there's a good level of awareness. I think that there are, people are running through the playbooks. I think the real test will be, when push comes to shove, are we actually prepared for what will effectively be a preview of the future? Sea level in December of this year is going to be a preview of what sea level will often be like 10 or 20 years from now in California because of sea level rise. So it will be an interesting litmus test there. Maybe the best case this winter is that, we get a little bit of coastal flooding and maybe some heavy rain, but no huge floods, nothing super destructive. But we had all these conversations, and so now we're better prepared.
So we should look at this El Nino system as a bit like a looking glass to the future of what climate could be doing and how we could best prepare for it 10 years on.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to think about it.
Daniel Swain, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me.
Thanks again for having me.
El Nino is a cyclical warming event, all to its own. But the warming patterns we will see this year will be impossible to untangle from the impacts of climate change. Taken together, El Niño might even offer a window into our future. The warming waters, increased rain, flooding events, and sticky, abnormally hot temperatures will likely give us a taste for what climate change can bring 10 years from now. Thankfully, scientists saw this El Niño coming, allowing Californians and the rest of the world to prepare accordingly. The question is, with the impacts of climate change looming on the horizon, will the world be prepared for that too? If you like this show, please rate and subscribe. It really does help us and our team. And if you want to see more behind-the-scenes content or videos of our interviews, you can follow me on Instagram at Randy_Green or on YouTube at Miranda C. Green. Thank you for listening to Boiling Point. I'm your host, Miranda Green. My producers are Mary Knopf and Jonathan Shiflett of Studiophonic. Additional production help from Audrey No. Sound design by Jonathan Shiflett. Monty Morin and Ingrid Lobet are our editors. Director of post-production is Patrick Stewart. Senior sound recording engineer is Nick Norton. Our podcast marketing manager is Bryn Jora. Our senior media manager is Kelsey Rodriguez. And our director of marketing operations is Nicole Adderholm. Special thanks to LA Times Studios president, Anna Migzanian. President and Chief Operating Officer of the Los Angeles Times is Chris Argentieri. Executive Editor of the Los Angeles Times is Terry Tang. Boiling Point is executive produced and co-created by Darius Derrickson.
It's been interesting coming out of the depths of the pandemic. You've seen certainly a lot of these kind of recreational amateur sports have grown very, very significantly. And you've mentioned, several around pickleball and paddle, even golf though, right?
Sure.
If you think about, the accessibility of golf and what it was 15, 20 years ago relative to the number of folks that were kind of new entrants into the sport during 2020, 21, when you couldn't really be with your friends and your family in an indoor environment, golf was kind of that great opportunity to be outside and be able to be, still enjoy kind of outdoor activities. So you've seen massive amounts of participation, growth in the golf ecosystem, and both on the public side and then the private side as well, right? And that's created a pretty fascinating roll-up opportunity. So I think you're going to continue to see that, and certainly saw that coming out of the depths of the pandemic.
I think it's kind of a particularly interesting trend because the world of AI and of kind of the virtual reality world, right, made it feel like you were moving into the direction of going to a stadium being a very friction-based experience and much easier viewing experience at home. And I think there was some concern for a bit of time that your top-end consumer might be willing to stay home and have a better in-home experience than stadium experience. But I think what we've seen in the market is that teams saw that trend. Yeah. And to the points you guys are making, they started to develop fan-friendly locations around the stadiums themselves. So they really tried to keep you within the ecosystem, not just on game day, but to make the town a part of your experience.
Which is very interesting, right? Because you look at COVID effects on other community type events like a movie theater. Sporting events are totally different. People want to be there, right? The energy, the excitement, everything around it that attracts people back. So can I be the troublemaker now?
Let's do it.
Okay. What's the disruptor you're worried about, right? Because as we've talked about, it's almost cycle independent, right? It's not a cyclical business. It has a strong following customer base. It's got steady economics. What's your fear, Vishal, as you think about what could disrupt this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's, as you look at the P&L for a lot of these assets, it's pretty simplified. So as you think about how some of these, team investments, for example, can get in trouble, obviously stagnation on the media rights side is, a very, very meaningful part of their revenue stream. So at the end of the day, there's obviously certain properties that have been relatively insulated from any type of headwinds. You see it with the NFL, with the NBA. You've seen really tremendous growth after every single renewal cycle. But at the end of the day, there's unlimited opportunities for fans to consume content today. And that wasn't necessarily the case 15, 20 years ago. So your ability to watch a second division Spanish soccer team is very, very easy and accessible at your fingertips. So what that's created, though, is a much more competitive broadcasting system. And as you think about one of the, again, one of the benefits of the revenue model is so recurring in nature, but obviously when you're deriving a significant portion of your revenues from media rights, obviously any type of headwind or stagnation could certainly, create a little bit of, flat growth.
Listen to What Matters Now with DLA Piper wherever you get your podcasts.